Good morning, my name is Michael, and I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to share with you something that is very dear to my heart. During the course of this presentation, we're going to focus in on something that I believe that is very paramount, has been detrimental to many young people's lives, in particular young children, and that is fatherlessness. If you're not sure what fatherlessness is, it is the absentee father within today's home and its effects on children within the local school system. Before I begin, I'd like to go ahead and give you just a little historical background of who I am. Back in 1995, it was my freshman year of high school, and it was the first time that I had ever been separated from my culture, meaning I went to an all-black public school. With that being stated, it was then that I had an awakening, so to speak, as far as what was it like to be in someone else's backyard playing underneath their rules, underneath their belief systems, underneath the different types of things that would influence them to be who they are. In the beginning, I felt like I was isolated. It was as though it was new to me. Not only was it new, I found it hard to create relationships because in my home, being with black people was not appropriate. My father grew up in West Virginia, and with him, anything dealing with darker skin tone either was considered inferior or not. We just were not allowed to play with those types of children. So with that being stated, I did find something new, something different for the first time in my life. So as for the following 4 years, I had the opportunity to be immersed within Black America. Being an athlete, I had the opportunity to play on many athletic teams, in particularly football and also baseball. And it was from there that I began to create my understanding of what it was like to be in an athletic program where you were literally the only white person on the team. From there, as my relationships were developing and I was growing, I began to see something that was different for me. Coming from a background where I did have a father, so to speak, I didn't see many dads in this arena. I don't know what it was. It wasn't that I was in particularly looking for that, but I noticed that when it came to sports functions, it was very rare that I saw the fathers at these sports functions. I saw aunts, uncles, mothers, etc., but never ever father. And how did I know that? When it came to introducing, I never heard, hey, this is my dad. Hey, this is my father. Instead, hey, this is my grandpa, or hey, this is auntie so-and-so, etc. And so one day I had a conversation with one of my classmates, and I just had a question. I said, where's your dad? You know, and I wasn't trying to be belligerent or trying to be nosy. I just wanted to know, because it was something that I had just noticed. And so I asked him, I said, hey, look, from your community, I very rarely see, your father or dads. Why is that? And honestly, I didn't get a straight answer from him. In fact, the conversation kind of went elsewhere. So it wasn't until after I joined the military and I continued to develop friendships with the black community that I began to understand that there was a void that was seen within the community. When I started doing my research on fatherlessness in general, I came across some statistics that really challenged my thinking, but also perplexed me to the idea that, hey, there have been statistical analyses that have been taken on the black community and the effects of fatherlessness within that community. I'd like to read the statistics to you, and then from there, I'd like to highlight why fathers are so important to children and their academic development and also the development as individuals as a whole. First, 51% of children are raised by unmarried mothers within the black community. And not only that, they're raised within poverty. 69% of all black children are born to single mothers. 48% of black children live without their fathers in the home, their biological fathers. 85% of children that exhibit behavior disorders come from fatherless homes. 71% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. 70 to 80% of juveniles within our state institutions come from fatherless homes. Finally, 85% of all the youths sitting in the prison grew up without a father in the home. So as you can see, just listening to the statistics that were just provided to you, we can see that as a whole, having a father in the life of a child is paramount. Not only that, we also see that not having a father within the black community has created such a vacuum of need, such a vacuum of leadership within that community. And so I have taken upon myself to go deeper because many of my friends are black. And I've had the opportunity to sit down and to chit-chat with a couple of fathers and just to ask them, what was it like to grow up? Whether you had a father, was he there? Was he an absentee father? Was he an abusive father, etc.? And so after gathering some research and doing interviews with these parents, in particular the fathers themselves, I came up with 5 particular things that we as educators can do to help these fathers out in their endeavors of raising their children. But not only to help the current fathers who are giving the best that they can give, but also to somehow, some way solicit the help of fathers who have not been there. To somehow, some way reach out and to let them know that they're so important to their children, that it's not okay just to make a baby, but to raise a child and to bring them up in such a way that they know who they are, that they're not ashamed of where they've come from. So with that being stated, here's what I believe are the 5 things that an educator can do to help men in particular black men, to step up to the plate, to take their rightful place within the classroom. Number 1, educators have the social responsibility to remind fathers that God has a special place for the orphan child. It was never His intent to leave children by themselves. The social order that God put into place was that there would be one man and one woman who would raise a family, who would show them the attributes of God. Number 2, for social responsibility, is that God has asked us as educators to help the least of these. With all due respect, in the world of diversity, we're so quick to help people who have mental and psychological needs. But the issue really is, in my opinion, are relationships. Relationships are the bedrock to any social order and any foundation. Thus, I believe that we as educators ought to step out and help the least of these. And in this case, it is the young black child who's living without his father. Finally, as an educator, we have the responsibility to provide to the families 4 things. We ought to get outside of our comfort zone and understand the culture in which these children come from. Number 2, we ought to make home visits to these children's homes to see what it's like to live and put ourselves into their place and what it's like to be in their culture. You know, poverty is so scathing that we get to a place that we're so fearful that we want to isolate ourselves from that. Yet Jesus put Himself in their position. He felt their pain. He saw their plight. He lived within their community. In fact, He became one of them, like He became a man. So I suggest that as an educator, we ought to get down and go into their communities, create mentorship programs as teachers, educators, community helpers, somehow, some way to create bonds, to somehow, some way to mentor the children that come in. Finally, we need to advocate for the child or for the children that come from fatherless backgrounds. If we as teachers are to be doing assessment tests, it is our right to know where these children come from. We need to know where they come from so that we can better serve them, so that we can create for them a healthy environment. Which leads me to my next point. Our commitment to the children is we have to provide a safe haven for black children. It should be all right to be black and walk into the classroom and be unashamed if they were the only black person within that classroom. They should have the opportunity to come into the classroom and receive the same type of education that is provided to their white and Asian and Hispanic brothers. Finally, we need to provide the time and the affection that is needed to give these children the love and the affirmation and to tell them, you know what, you can be somebody. God has designated you to be a leader, to be a person of influence, to be somebody who can say, you know what, I can do this. I can do this. And whatever God puts in their life for them to accomplish, He's going to be with them. And we as educators, in particularly male, white, educated gentlemen, ought to get down and say, you know what, I'm going to lock arms with you, even at a young age, and we're going to watch you grow so you can flourish to be all that God has created you to be. The educator also needs to take into context his own personal integrity. It's a shameful thing to walk into the classroom and to begin to judge children based on the color of their skin. In fact, Martin Luther King, he fought for that. How dare we judge a person by the color of their skin and not the content of their character? We have this opportunity to take this this soft clay and mold it. You need to be committed to these children. And the only way you can be committed is you have to walk with such integrity before God and before man and saying, you know what? I'm going to give my absolute best to see these children come up in the ways of the Lord. That includes in education. Yes, there are going to be children, no matter what race they come from, that have academic struggles. But we must give our best effort to provide an environment that cultivates such stimulation that they want to learn, that these intrinsic desires that they have are want to excel and to be the best that they can be. All right? What that looks like in the end is not for us to determine. Our goal is to lock arms with them and raise them up to the next level so that when we hand them off to the next grade level, they are prepared and equipped to accomplish great things. Finally, we need to create practices. We need to create a curriculum that invites children to say, you know what, it's all right to be me. That although my dad may not be in the picture, I can trust you, Michael. Now, they may never tell you that, but when they walk into your classroom and that child wraps his arms around you and says, Michael, I missed you, Mr. Michael. I love you, Mr. I'm so glad to be a part of it. Let me tell you, that is the greatest reward. That is the greatest reward for an educator, to see that a child comes up and wraps his arms around you and is so glad to be with you. From that position, it is there that we must create a curriculum that, number one, understands that they have a need. We're not going to, stigmatize them. Rather, we're going to treat them in such a way that God sees them. And how does God see them? As they're created in His image. They bear His markings. So let's treat them that way. Create a practice. If they're struggling with something with their learning, then we create instruction that allows them to help them to understand the material. All right? It takes time, it takes commitment, but more importantly, it takes the heart. The heart has to be right, and your heart has to go into your practice. And finally, the educational professional. As a professional, we have an obligation to get outside the classroom and get inside the community. The way that happens is that we have to be willing to get outside of our comfort zone, go into the homes, into the communities, into their places of worship, and get to know these children. Here we are as educators. We have one purpose in mind, to share this message that although Dad, quote unquote, may not be there, there are men who are willing to step up and say, you know what, I'll stand in his place. I will be the man I need to be. And I understand that this is costly and it will cost us, and it will. But the reward is exponential to the place that I don't think you could possibly put a number on it. Each time we infect a young black child, to raise these young children up in such a way, and they see who they are and they understand why they're here, we have created a child that is prepared to step out into their social world and to be responsible young men and women who create families of protection, who create families ordained by God. In conclusion, I'd like to give you a quote by our current president, President Barack Obama. He states, "We need fathers to realize that responsibility does not end at conception. We need them to realize what makes you a man is not the ability to have a child. It is the courage to raise one." And I'll leave it with that. Educators, whomever, whatever comes into your classroom, that is God's platform for you to share His message and to be to them a representation of who He is. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. May God bless you.